I am Natalie, 34 years old, and I thought gifting my parents a seaside mansion for their 40th anniversary would be the happiest day of my life. Instead, when I pulled into the driveway of the 825,000 property, I found my mother crying and my father trembling on the porch. Inside, my mother-in-law was casually sipping a margarita, pointing aggressively at the front door and screaming that my parents were trespassing in her home. What my husband and his entitled family did not know was that stealing this particular seaside property would soon cost them and their bloated egos absolutely everything. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who underestimated your worth. The salty ocean breeze of Myrtle Beach usually brought me a sense of peace, but today the air felt suffocatingly thick. I had spent countless months planning this surprise for my parents, Thomas and Diane. They were hard-working blue-collar people who had sacrificed every luxury in their lives just to put me through college. I had purchased this stunning beachfront property with my own funds. It was a closely guarded secret from my husband Jason and his materialistic family. They firmly believed I was just a low-level financial analyst, essentially a glorified math tutor scraping by on pennies, while Jason paraded around our neighborhood as a newly promoted regional director. I parked right behind Jason's luxury sedan, a terrible knot forming deep in my stomach as I saw my parents' battered suitcases tossed carelessly onto the porch steps. The front door was wide open, letting the sounds of shouting echo out into the driveway. I sprinted up the stairs, my heels clicking frantically against the wood, and stopped dead in the sunlit entryway. My mother was wiping tears from her cheeks, holding tightly to my father's arm as he tried to console her. Standing right in the exact center of the vast living room was Brenda, my horribly entitled mother-in-law. She was wearing an oversized designer sun hat indoors, swirling a margarita in her hand, and looking at my parents with a gaze of disgust. "Get your cheap luggage off my mahogany porch," Brenda shrieked, taking a sip of her drink. "This is a highly exclusive, heavily guarded, private, gated community. You clearly do not belong here, and you are completely ruining my ocean view." I stepped forward, my voice trembling with rage as I asked Brenda what on earth she thought she was doing. Brenda rolled her eyes, scoffing loudly as she looked me up and down with her usual glare. "Oh, look who finally decided to show up. Your parents were just trying to break into my brand new house. I told them to leave immediately before I call the police and have them arrested for trespassing." "Your new house," I repeated, staring at her in disbelief. Brenda let out a harsh, mocking laugh that echoed sharply off the high ceilings. "Did you really think a glorified math tutor making pennies bought this place? Please, Natalie, do not be delusional. My brilliant son Jason just got a promotion. He bought this beautiful house for his real family. It is his gift to me. I should have known you would try to sneak your freeloading parents in here to leech off his success." The venom in her words was nothing new to me. For the 10 years Jason and I had been married, Brenda never missed an opportunity to remind me of my inferior place. When Jason and I first started dating, she handed me a gift card to a discount clothing store during a family dinner, loudly suggesting I buy something presentable so I would not embarrass her successful son in public. She constantly belittled my career, oblivious to the fact that my independent cybersecurity and financial management firm had recently been acquired for millions of dollars. I kept my substantial wealth covert because Jason had a terrible habit of treating my hard-earned money as his own personal slush fund. But hearing her brutally degrade my kind, hard-working parents in the very home I had just purchased for them made my blood boil with anger. Before I could command Brenda to pack her designer bags and get out of my house, Jason hurried out of the gourmet kitchen. He grabbed my forearm, his grip painfully and aggressively tight, and forcefully dragged me into the adjacent hallway far away from my parents. "What is wrong with you?" I demanded violently, yanking my arm free from his grasp. "Tell your mother she is completely out of her mind. This is my parents' incredibly special anniversary present, not hers to steal." Jason gritted his teeth, his face flushing red with a mixture of frantic panic and selfish anger. He leaned in, whispering violently so the others would not hear him. Just let them go to a cheap motel, Natalie. I told my mom I bought this exact place to save face with her and the rest of my family. I desperately needed her to see how well I am doing in my career. Do not humiliate me in front of my own mother on a day like today. I stared at the man I had faithfully been married to for a decade, feeling a freezing cold realization wash entirely over my body. You genuinely want me to kick my parents out of the house I bought with my own money just to protect your fragile, pathetic ego? I quietly asked, my voice dropping to a dead, terrifying calm. Jason smirked, his momentary panic suddenly replaced by a dark, incredibly arrogant confidence. You did not really buy it, my sweet Natalie. I used my legal power of attorney to transfer the deed directly into my family trust. Legally, you have absolutely no say in what happens next. The sound of slow, mocking applause echoed from the gourmet kitchen, cutting through the tense air of the living room. Jamal strolled into the entryway, with a deeply arrogant smirk plastered across his face. He was an African-American real estate broker who wore his tailored cashmere polo shirts, like a suit of armor, always projecting an image of extreme wealth that I knew for a fact he did not actually possess. He tossed a thick, cream-colored legal folder onto the marble kitchen island. The heavy thud made my parents jump. "Read it and weep, Natalie," Jamal said, leaning against the counter and crossing his arms with a predatory grin. I pulled the public records myself. The property was registered under an entity called Coastal Horizon LLC. You really thought you were being clever, hiding a seaside mansion behind a corporate veil to keep it away from your husband. But as a licensed broker in this state, I know exactly how corporate loopholes work. Any asset acquired during the marriage is marital property. Jason is the primary account holder on your joint finances, which means he had every legal right to authorize the transfer of this deed into the family trust. I pushed the paperwork through my own agency this morning. The county clerk has already stamped it. You have been completely outplayed. Vanessa strutted out from the kitchen right behind her husband, holding a matching margarita glass and wearing an expression of pure disgust. Honestly, I am shocked she even managed to get a bank loan for a place like this, Vanessa sneered, looking me up and down as if I were covered in dirt. Remember my bachelorette weekend in Vegas 2 years ago? She cried over a $500 dinner bill and refused to chip in for the VIP pool cabana. She has always been so incredibly broke and stingy. Jason has been carrying her dead weight for a decade, and now she is trying to hoard property behind his back. The sheer audacity of her statement made the air in the room crackle with tension. I remembered that Vegas trip vividly. I had refused to pay for Vanessa's excessive bottle service because Jason had secretly drained our checking account the week prior to cover Jamal's missed mortgage payment. They had lived completely beyond their means for years, using my silence and my bank accounts to fund their fake luxury lifestyle. My father. Thomas reached down with trembling hands and picked up the handle of his scuffed suitcase. His face was pale, etched with the deep lines of a man who had worked in a steel mill for 40 years to provide a quiet, honest life for his family. He looked utterly humiliated. "Come on, Diane," he whispered to my mother, his voice thick with unearned shame. "We are not going to be the reason our daughter's marriage falls apart today. We can find a cheap motel off the highway. It is perfectly fine." My mother wiped her tear-streaked face, her shoulders slumped in total defeat as she turned her back to the beautiful ocean view I had bought for her. Jason watched my parents retreat with a look of supreme satisfaction. He adjusted his expensive watch, a gift he had bought for himself, using my supposed joint funds, and turned his cold gaze back to me. "See?" Jason commanded, pointing a finger directly at my face. "They know exactly what their place is in the pecking order. They know when to walk away. Now stop throwing a pathetic tantrum, be a good wife, and go into the kitchen to make some appetizers. My mother has 50 of the most elite members of the country club arriving in exactly 2 hours to celebrate her new beach house, and you are holding up the entire schedule." I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply watched my parents standing on the porch looking completely broken on what was supposed to be their 40th anniversary. I reached into my designer handbag, a custom piece the in-laws always assumed was a cheap counterfeit, and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number and put it on speaker for the entire room to hear. "Good afternoon," a polished voice answered through the phone speaker. "Ritz-Carlton concierge, how may I assist you today?" I kept my eyes locked directly on Jason as I spoke. "I need your absolute best accommodation for tonight. The presidential penthouse suite. Yes, the oceanfront one with private dining service and a dedicated chauffeur. Book it for an entire week for my parents Thomas and Diane." Jamal scoffed loudly, rolling his eyes at the ceiling. "You cannot even afford a highway motel room, Natalie, let alone a penthouse. Stop embarrassing yourself." The concierge replied cheerfully through the speaker. "Of course, ma'am. The total for a 7-night stay in the presidential suite comes to $35,000. Will we be putting this on the usual card on file?" "Yes," I said smoothly, never breaking eye contact with my husband. "Use the American Express Centurion." I reached into my wallet and pulled out the solid titanium black card. I tossed it onto the marble island right next to Jamal's forged real estate folder. The heavy metal hit the stone surface with a loud, unmistakable clack. Silence crashed over the room instantly. Brenda stopped swirling her margarita, her glass frozen mid-air. Vanessa's smug smile vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. Jason stared at the titanium card, his eyes wide and panicked, recognizing the exclusive status symbol reserved only for the ultra-wealthy. The air grew thick with a sudden, suffocating realization that the woman they had spent 10 years treating like absolute garbage possessed a level of power and wealth they could not even begin to comprehend. Brenda's margarita splatters violently across the pristine hardwood floor, the crystal glass shattering into 100 glittering pieces. The sharp crash rings out, but the sound barely registers over Jason's sudden explosive movement. He lunges across the massive marble island, his hands swiping aggressively through the air as he tries to snatch the heavy titanium card right out of my fingers. I take a swift, calculated step back, letting his hand hit nothing but empty space. "Where the hell did you get that?" Jason screams, his face twisting into a grotesque mask of panic and pure rage. "You stole my credit line. You psychotic witch, you actually stole my identity to open a luxury account." He actually believes the wealth sitting in my palm somehow belongs to him. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh that echoes off the high vaulted ceilings of the beachfront mansion. "Your credit line. Jason, your credit line maxed out 6 months ago. Or did you honestly think I was too stupid to notice the massive gaping holes in our joint savings accounts?" I step closer to the island, refusing to shrink back from his aggression. "The time for keeping the peace is officially over. For 3 years, you looked me right in the eyes and told me we were struggling. You told me we had to tighten our belts to prepare for our future. You watched me wear secondhand clothes from Goodwill. You watched me skip lunches and drive a 10-year-old car with a failing transmission just so we could save money. Meanwhile, you were secretly siphoning thousands of dollars every single month to cover Jamal's defaulted commercial leases." Jamal stiffens instantly, his arrogant posture crumbling as Vanessa whips her head around to shoot him a confused, furious glare. I do not give either of them a single second to recover. I turn my absolute fury onto Brenda, who is currently staring at her ruined designer shoes. "And let us not forget your mother's luxury shopping addiction," I say, my voice ringing with hard authority. "Those $5,000 Louis Vuitton bags she parades around the country club, the weekly spa retreats, and the lavish dinners. You funded all of it with the money I earned, Jason. You literally stole my salary to bankroll this entire parasitic family while treating me like a financial burden in my own marriage." Jason's chest heaves. He looks completely cornered, his dark, pathetic secrets finally dragged out into the harsh coastal sunlight. But his ingrained arrogance quickly overrides his guilt. He squares his shoulders, trying to project dominance. "I am the head of our household," he sneers. "What is yours is mine. And right now, I am freezing whatever fraudulent account you opened in my name." He violently yanks his phone from his pocket, his thumbs flying across the screen as he frantically opens his private banking app. "You are done, Natalie. I am locking this card immediately, and then I am calling the fraud department to have you arrested for identity theft. I simply smile. I do not yell and I do not frantically type. I pull my own iPad from my handbag and calmly open my secure encrypted wealth management portal. I look Jason dead in the eyes, raise my index finger, and tap a single red icon on the screen. Jason taps his phone screen repeatedly, his breathing growing shallow and erratic. He refreshes his banking app. He refreshes it again. I watch in real time as the color drains completely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. His phone drops slightly in his trembling hand. He looks up at me, his eyes wide with absolute unadulterated terror. Insufficient funds. Jason chokes out, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wheeze. Natalie, the account is completely empty. Where is my $150,000 savings? Where is my money? He takes a staggering step toward me, looking completely unhinged. The money he had hoarded, the secret safety net he had built by stealing from me for years, is entirely gone, erased in a single devastating second. He opens his mouth to scream again, but before he can completely lose his mind, Brenda loudly claps her hands together. She deliberately steps over the shattered glass and the puddle of spilled alcohol, waving her hand dismissively. Her narcissism is so profound, so deeply ingrained that her own son's financial ruin does not even register on her radar. She is entirely unbothered by his panic. "I do not care about your petty little marital spat," Brenda announces, her voice dripping with extreme irritation. "I have 50 VIP country club guests arriving in exactly 2 hours for my official housewarming party. The catering crew is prepping out back, the florists are almost done, and I will not have this day ruined by your endless drama." She reaches over to the kitchen counter, grabs a black uniform apron left behind by the event staff, and throws it directly at my chest. "Natalie, since your parents have finally taken a hint and left my property, you are going to make yourself useful. Put on the maid's apron. You are serving the appetizers." Jason is still hyperventilating, staring blankly at his phone screen displaying a massive negative balance. Jamal and Vanessa are arguing in harsh, urgent whispers about the hidden debt I just exposed. Brenda just glares at me, tapping her foot impatiently, fully expecting my usual quiet compliance. I catch the black apron before it hits the floor. I smooth out the fabric, look Brenda right in the eyes, and give her the warmest, most terrifying smile I can possibly muster. I would love to. I slip the black apron over my head, tying the strings tightly around my waist, smoothing the fabric down with slow, deliberate precision. Brenda let out a harsh, satisfied snort, turning her back on me to shout at a delivery driver hauling boxes of expensive champagne toward the patio. Vanessa immediately stepped into my personal space, her fake eyelashes fluttering as she shoved a heavy bottle of industrial bleach and a coarse sponge directly into my chest. "Make yourself useful for once and go scrub the guest bathrooms before the real guests arrive," Vanessa commanded, her voice dripping with venom. Honestly, I do not understand why Jason did not marry Madison. She was a corporate lawyer and actually had class. She would have hired a professional cleaning crew for us, instead of standing around looking clueless. "You have always been completely useless compared to his ex-girlfriends. Now go." I took the bleach and the sponge, giving Vanessa a polite hollow smile, and walked down the long sunlit hallway toward the master suite. The moment I was out of her line of sight, I dropped the cleaning supplies straight into a trash can. I had absolutely zero intention of scrubbing a single toilet. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out my iPad. As the sole CEO and founder of Coastal Horizon LLC, was the legal purchaser of this property. That meant I possessed the master administrative credentials to the home's state-of-the-art centralized smart hub. Jason and his family thought they had cleverly stolen a physical building, completely unaware that this mansion was essentially a giant interconnected supercomputer. I sat on the edge of the leather sofa in the den, my fingers flying across the digital dashboard. First, I accessed the property perimeter security. I altered the biometric locks on the front gates and the heavy mahogany doors, changing the access permissions and setting a silent time delay that would trap anyone inside or outside once triggered. Next, I tapped into the HVAC protocols. I overrode the manual thermostats Jason had proudly shown off earlier, burying a coded command deep in the system that would severely disrupt the climate control at my command. Finally, I went straight for the jugular and accessed the property's massive commercial-grade Wi-Fi network. Jamal was heavily reliant on his constant internet connection to flaunt his fake real estate deals. I seamlessly reconfigured the router pathways, installing a hidden kill switch that I could execute with a single tap from my phone. I locked the screen, slipped the iPad back into my bag, and adjusted my maid's apron. The Trojan horse was securely in place. 2 hours later, the heavy iron gate swung open, and a fleet of luxury vehicles began pouring into the long, winding driveway. The high society guests stepped out into the sweltering South Carolina heat, seeking immediate refuge in the air-conditioned comfort of the massive living room. They were a sea of pastel linen suits, glittering cocktail dresses, and pretentious chatter, all of them blissfully unaware of the absolute war zone they had just walked into. Brenda was in her absolute element. She paraded through the sprawling room, a fresh margarita in her hand, aggressively grabbing the arms of local politicians and wealthy socialites. She loudly introduced the stunning property as the direct fruit of her brilliant son's relentless hard work. She pointed out the custom crown molding and the imported Italian marble, happily accepting their lavish praise while claiming she had designed the interior herself. Jason was soaking up the unearned admiration like a sponge. He stood near the floor-to-ceiling ocean-front windows, puffing out his chest and accepting firm handshakes from the executives of his financial firm. He played the part of the humble, successful family man, flawlessly laughing at their jokes and nodding with fake modesty every time someone complimented the sheer scale of the estate. I moved silently through the wealthy crowd, holding a heavy silver tray loaded with crystal champagne flutes. I played my subservient role perfectly, keeping my eyes lowered and offering drinks to the arrogant guests who completely ignored my existence. They took the glasses without a single thank you, treating me exactly like the hired help Brenda wanted me to be. I watched Vanessa aggressively pushing her way through the crowd, desperate to get noticed by the wealthier wives, while Jamal loudly bragged to a group of investors about commercial properties he did not actually own. I navigated my way toward the center of the room, heading directly for a tight circle of distinguished older men standing near the patio doors. Right in the middle of this elite group was Richard Vance, the notoriously ruthless CEO of Jason's firm. He was a man who demanded absolute perfection and possessed the power to end a career with a single phone call. Jason was hovering right at Richard's elbow, laughing entirely too hard at a joke the CEO had just told, desperate to solidify his standing. I stepped up to the circle, gracefully extending the silver tray toward Richard. "Champagne, sir," I offered quietly. Richard turned to grab a flute, but as his hand reached out, his eyes locked onto my face. He froze completely. The crystal glass hovered inches from his fingers. The polite conversational hum in their immediate circle died instantly as the powerful CEO stared at me in total bewilderment. "Natalie," Richard asked, his booming, authoritative voice cutting through the surrounding chatter and silencing the executives nearby. "What on earth are you doing wearing an apron and serving drinks?" Jason spun around, his fake smile faltering instantly as he saw me standing face to face with his ultimate boss. He opened his mouth, likely to make a sharp excuse and dismiss me back to the kitchen, but Richard did not give him the chance. Richard stepped closer to me, his brow furrowed in utter confusion, speaking loud enough for the entire room to hear. "I do not understand." Richard continued, gesturing to my maid's uniform. "Did your cybersecurity firm not just acquire our entire back-end financial portfolio yesterday morning for $20 million? Jason overheard the exact dollar amount. All the blood rushed out of his face in a split second. He staggered back a step, his mouth falling open as his jaw practically hit the imported Italian marble floor. Richard Vance did not break eye contact with me, completely ignoring Jason's frantic babbling. "Richard, there must be some sort of ridiculous mistake," Jason stammered, his voice pitching up an octave as he desperately tried to salvage the situation. He let out a loud, entirely unnatural laugh that made several nearby executives turn their heads in our direction. "Natalie is just a freelance math tutor. She barely balances our checkbook. You must be confusing her with someone else entirely." Richard frowned, his sharp eyes darting between Jason's panicked face and my perfectly calm demeanor. I do not make mistakes regarding $20 million corporate acquisitions, Jason. I personally signed the final integration paperwork this morning. I know exactly who the CEO of Coastal Horizon is. Jason did not wait for Richard to say another word. He clamped his heavy hand around my wrist, his fingers digging painfully into my skin, and practically dragged me away from the CEO. He shoved me into the empty alcove near the grand staircase, his eyes wild with a desperate, unhinged fury. What is he talking about? Jason hissed, his face inches from mine, his breath hot and ragged. What $20 million acquisition? Tell me right now what you have been doing behind my back. I calmly pried his fingers off my wrist one by one, refusing to break my cold gaze. I have been working, Jason. Just like I have been for the past 10 years, while you steadily drained our joint accounts to buy designer watches and fund your family's reckless spending. Before Jason could scream another demand, a loud metallic clanging sound echoed from the front of the estate. The massive, heavy iron gates at the entrance of the driveway slammed shut with a definitive bone-rattling thud. The electronic deadbolts engaged simultaneously, emitting a sharp mechanical beep that resonated all the way up to the marble patio. My smart home trap had officially sprung. Out on the sweltering driveway, 3 large delivery vans belonging to the elite catering company Brenda had hired came to an abrupt, screeching halt. The drivers honked their horns loudly, waving frantically at the security cameras mounted on the stone pillars. The back doors of the vans were thrown open by panicked staff, revealing towering racks of delicate hors d'oeuvres, fresh seafood, and intricate ice sculptures that were rapidly melting in the brutal South Carolina summer heat. The $10,000 catering crew was completely locked out of the property. Inside the mansion, the celebratory mood shifted instantly into absolute chaos. The 50 VIP guests, who had been expecting a lavish spread of imported caviar and champagne upon arrival, began to murmur with growing impatience and irritation. The smell of expensive perfume mingled with the rising tension as elite stomachs began to rumble. Brenda rushed to the front window, pressing her face against the glass in total disbelief. "What is going on out there?" Brenda shrieked, her voice shrill enough to shatter the crystal glasses resting on the tables. She spun around, her eyes wildly scanning the room until they locked onto me standing in the alcove. "Natalie, the security gates are malfunctioning, the caterers are stuck outside sweating, and my important guests are starving. Go out there and fix the gate manually right now." I stood my ground in the alcove, slowly adjusting the ridiculous black apron she had forced upon me just an hour earlier. "I am just the hired help today, Brenda. I do not know anything about highly complex security gates or smart home configurations." Jason lunged forward again, pointing an aggressive shaking finger directly in my face in front of the entire staring crowd. "Stop acting stupid and do exactly what my mother tells you," he roared, completely losing his carefully curated professional facade. "You are deliberately trying to humiliate me in front of my boss and my colleagues. Go out to the security panel and figure it out before I physically drag you out there myself." Standing there under the harsh, glittering glare of the chandelier, Jason's public outburst felt intensely, painfully familiar. He was using the exact same tone and aggressive posture he had used 3 years ago at his firm's annual corporate Christmas party. That night, Jason had consumed far too much scotch to mask his insecurities and carelessly knocked a full glass of red wine all over a senior partner's wife. Instead of taking responsibility and apologizing, he had instantly grabbed my arm, yanked me into the center of the crowded ballroom, and screamed at me for being clumsy and humiliating him. He had forced me to take the blame for his mistake, calling me a useless embarrassment, while his wealthy colleagues watched in uncomfortable pity. I had spent that entire car ride home crying in silence while he continuously berated my intelligence and my worth. But I was not that broken, silent woman anymore. I did not shrink back, and I absolutely did not apologize. I looked at Jason, then at Brenda, and smiled a cold, razor-sharp smile that made Jason swallow hard. "I am not touching that gate," I stated loudly, ensuring my voice carried over the murmuring guests. You explicitly demanded that I be the maid today, and maids do not possess the clearance to handle advanced corporate security software. Brenda's face turned a dangerous, mottled shade of crimson. She opened her mouth to scream another vile insult at me, but a sudden violent commotion from the back hallway cut her off completely. Jamal burst into the sprawling living room like a man running from a burning building. He was sprinting so fast his designer loafers slipped dangerously on the polished marble floor. His face was drenched in beads of nervous sweat, completely ruining his carefully styled wealthy broker appearance. He clutched his silver laptop tightly to his chest like a lifeline, his chest heaving violently as he gasped for air. "Jason!" Jamal bellowed, his voice cracking with absolute, unadulterated panic. "The Wi-Fi is down. The entire network just vanished into thin air." Jason glared at his brother-in-law, clearly irritated by the sudden interruption to his rage. "Who cares about the Wi-Fi right now, Jamal? The caterers are locked out and we have no food." "I care," Jamal screamed back, stepping right up to Jason and violently shaking his laptop in the air. "I am in the middle of a high-stakes Zoom call with overseas investors. I am exactly 30 seconds away from closing a $4 million commercial real estate deal. If my connection drops permanently, the buyer is going to walk away, and I am going to lose the commission that is supposed to save me from federal bankruptcy. I need the router password right now. Give me the master password." Jason stands completely paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish. Richard's devastating revelation hangs heavy in the humid air, absolutely fracturing Jason's carefully constructed reality. The CEO of his firm just confirmed that the woman Jason treats like an unpaid servant actually holds the keys to a $20 million empire. But Jamal is far too frantic about his failing $4 million Zoom call to care about Jason's career violently imploding. Jamal shoves aggressively past the CEO, his heavy footsteps thudding against the marble as he marches straight down the hallway. I do not wait for him to find me. I calmly step away from the stunned circle of executives weaving through the whispering guests until I reach the discreet media console built into the corridor wall. I open the sleek glass cabinet, reach inside, and easily disconnect the primary fiber optic power cable. I stand tall by the blinking dying router, casually looping the thick black cord around my fingers as Jamal storms around the corner. His eyes are wild and bloodshot, darting around until they lock onto the disconnected cable dangling from my hand. He completely loses whatever shred of sanity he has left. He lunges at me, closing the distance in 2 massive strides, his face twisted with an ugly, panicked rage. He aggressively raises his heavy hand in the air, his palm flattening as if he is about to violently shove me against the wall to take what he wants. "Give me the cord, you crazy witch, or I will throw you out the window!" Jamal screams, spittle flying from his lips as he towers over me. "I am losing my commission. You are ruining my life." I do not flinch. I do not take a single step backward. I look at his raised hand and feel absolutely nothing but cold, calculated resolve. Instead of retreating, I reach into my designer handbag with my free hand and pull out a thick, heavy manila envelope. I look Jamal right in his desperate, bloodshot eyes and drop the package directly onto the hardwood floor between us. The heavy envelope hits the ground and bursts wide open. Dozens of highly classified financial documents spill out, fanning across the floorboards in a damning display of absolute ruin. These are not just casual bank statements. They are highly detailed ledgers from offshore accounts, aggressive collection notices from unregulated island casinos, and massive defaulted loan applications bearing Jamal's signature. And right in the center of the mess, printed in crisp, black ink, are the wire transfer logs I legally obtained during my firm's acquisition of Jason's back-end portfolio. The logs clearly show Jason executing dozens of illegal, unauthorized transfers of his clients' corporate funds straight into Jamal's failing shell companies to keep the arrogant broker out of federal prison. Vanessa, who had sprinted down the hallway after her husband to see what the commotion was, stops dead in her tracks. Her high heels click to a halt as she looks down at the sea of paperwork. Her perfectly manicured hands tremble violently as she crouches down, her silk dress brushing the floor, and picks up a bright red foreclosure notice attached to a massive casino debt ledger. I watch her eyes dart back and forth across the page as she reads the staggering negative balances and the final warnings from aggressive creditors. For years, Vanessa had made it her absolute mission to flaunt her so-called luxury lifestyle in my face. She shoved her $500 manicures, her imported leather shoes, and her constant exotic European vacations down my throat. She demanded I bow to her superior wealth while I quietly shopped at discount racks to keep our household afloat. She called me a pathetic charity case every single Thanksgiving, bragging about Jamal's brilliance while treating me like dirt on her shoe. Now she holds the undeniable proof that her entire existence was a complete and utter fabrication. She realizes in real time that her husband is absolutely broke, drowning in illegal offshore gambling debts, and that her glorious, untouchable lifestyle was funded entirely by Jason stealing corporate money. The brilliant real estate broker she bragged about is nothing but a degenerate gambler and a fraud. Vanessa slowly stands up. The heavy financial paper crunches in her shaking grip. She turns toward Jamal, her face contorted with a mixture of profound humiliation and explosive fury. He lowers his hands, stepping back from me as he realizes what his wife is holding. Without a single word of warning, Vanessa rears back and slaps Jamal directly across the face with all the strength she possesses. The sharp, resounding crack echoes down the hallway, freezing the caterers outside the glass doors and the wealthy executives in the adjacent living room. Jamal stumbles backward, clutching his stinging red cheek, as Vanessa begins screaming hysterically, cursing him for faking their wealth and destroying her social standing. She throws the crumpled papers at his chest, sobbing in sheer outrage as her fake empire collapses around her. The entire family instantly erupts into a violent, deafening shouting match. Brenda runs into the hallway, screeching at Vanessa to stop causing a scene while Jamal tries to grab his wife's wrists to silence her. Through the chaos, Jason pushes his way forward. He looks down at the scattered wire transfer logs bearing his digital signature and the name of his corporate clients. He realizes instantly that his boss, who is standing just feet away in the living room, is about to see irrefutable proof of his massive embezzlement. The CEO is already pulling out his phone, his face set in stone. Jason turns his gaze slowly to me. His face turns an apocalyptic shade of purple, the thick veins bulging dangerously against the collar of his expensive shirt, as he realizes I orchestrated this entire demolition. "I am divorcing you," Jason roars over the screaming family, his voice raw with panic and vicious spite. "And I am taking half of your so-called black card money in alimony. I am divorcing you," Jason roars over the screaming family, his voice raw with panic and vicious spite. "And I am taking half of your so-called black card money in alimony." The sheer volume of his declaration cuts through the chaotic noise in the hallway. Vanessa stops her hysterical sobbing. Jamal freezes with his hands still clutching his reddened cheek, and the entire room of 50 elite guests falls into a stunned, absolute silence. Richard Vance, Jason's CEO, simply crosses his arms, watching the implosion of his junior executive with clinical detachment. Jason misinterprets the silence as captive awe. He straightens his wrinkled collar, suddenly puffing out his chest and turning away from me to address the wealthy crowd directly. He completely ignores the locked glass doors, where the furious catering crew is still sweating in the punishing sun, abandoning the immediate crisis to step fully into the role of the aggrieved, highly successful patriarch dealing with a hysterical spouse. "Well, I want everyone to bear witness to this," Jason announces, pacing across the marble floor with exaggerated confidence. "I am officially divorcing this psychotic, ungrateful woman. She has been secretly hoarding wealth, hiding assets during our marriage, and orchestrating these ridiculous stunts to embarrass my family in front of my esteemed colleagues. But the law in this state is completely clear. Every single dime she has hidden, every asset she has acquired is marital property. I will be taking exactly 50% of this beachfront estate and half of whatever shadow accounts she is currently holding." He turns back to look at me, a sickening, patronizing smirk returning to his face. He points a finger at my chest, addressing Richard and the other executives, as if I am a disobedient child throwing a tantrum. I made her who she is today, Jason says, his voice dripping with monumental arrogance. When I met Natalie 10 years ago, she was nothing. She was soft. She was weak. I provided the structure, the strict standards, and the tough love necessary to build her resilience. I carried her financially while she played around with her little freelance projects. I put a roof over her head. I let her drive my old cars. I graciously tolerated her wearing thrift store rags because I wanted to teach her the value of $1. Any success she has managed to scrape together in the shadows is a direct result of the unyielding foundation I generously provided. She is only standing here acting tough because I taught her how to survive the real world. And this is exactly how she repays me. By throwing a petty fit and trying to ruin my mother's housewarming party. The sheer delusion of his monologue makes my blood run cold, yet it perfectly encapsulates the last decade of my life. For 10 long years, he had masterfully framed his financial abuse, his constant belittling, and his relentless demands as character building. He actually convinced himself that draining my bank accounts to fund Jamal's sports cars and Vanessa's designer bags was somehow a favor to me, a test of my wifely devotion. He stole my wages to support his mother's country club memberships, constantly gaslighting me into believing we were perpetually on the brink of poverty, all while demanding my absolute gratitude for his supposed sacrifices. Now watch exactly how a real man handles a rogue dependent. Jason brags, holding his phone up high for the entire room to see. I'm going to freeze every single dime she thinks she has. I am calling my private wealth management firm right now. When I am done with this phone call, she will be walking out of here with nothing but the cheap clothes on her back. He taps the screen aggressively, dialing a number and hitting the speakerphone icon. The dial tone rings out, echoing off the high vaulted ceilings of the living room. The crowd watches in rapt, uncomfortable fascination. On the third ring, a voice answers. It is Bryce, Jason's aggressively overpriced wealth manager, but he does not sound like his usual slick, confident self. He sounds absolutely terrified, his breathing heavy and erratic through the phone speaker. Jason Bryce says, his voice cracking instantly, lacking any professional composure. Thank God you called. I have been trying to reach you for the last 20 minutes. It is a complete disaster. Jason chuckles, entirely missing the sheer panic in the man's voice. He winks at a nearby executive, leaning into his own hubris. Relax, Bryce. Everything is under control on my end. I just need you to freeze all the joint and individual accounts immediately. My wife is trying to pull a fast one, and I need you to lock down the assets before she moves anything else. And prepare the legal paperwork to subpoena her hidden corporate accounts. I want 50% of whatever she is holding seized by the end of the business day. There is a long, agonizing pause on the other end of the line. The silence stretches so thin it threatens to snap. The ambient noise of the party seems to evaporate, leaving only the sound of Bryce's ragged breathing echoing through the phone's speaker. Jason Bryce finally whispers, his voice trembling so violently that the speakerphone crackles and distorts. I cannot freeze the accounts. I do not know how to tell you this, but there is absolutely nothing left to freeze. Jason's arrogant smile vanishes instantly. The confident posture he had struck just moments before visibly crumbles. What are you talking about? He snaps, the fake bravado cracking into genuine alarm. What do you mean there is nothing left? Look at the main portfolio. Bryce takes a shaky breath. 10 minutes ago, a corporate entity called Coastal Horizon LLC executed a supreme legal sweep on your entire financial portfolio. They possessed an ironclad, unchallengeable authorization code that completely bypassed our internal security protocols. Every single dollar you had in savings, your checking accounts, your mutual funds, and your offshore retirement portfolio has been entirely liquidated. The funds were instantly diverted to cover massive defaulted commercial leases and offshore gambling penalties tied directly to your digital signature. Jason staggers backward, his knees practically buckling as the color drains completely from his face, leaving his skin an ashen, sickly gray. Liquidated, he chokes out his eyes, darting frantically around the room, meeting the shocked stares of his colleagues. No, that is impossible. That is my money. You fix this, Bryce. You reverse those transfers right now. Call the fraud department. I cannot reverse it, Jason. Bryce cries through the speaker, sounding on the verge of a total breakdown. The transfers were completely legal and executed with your exact credentials. They did not just empty the accounts, Jason. They applied the remaining offshore debts directly to your personal credit line. Your net worth is currently negative $400,000. You are completely bankrupt. Jason drops the phone. It clatters loudly against the marble floor, but the call remains connected, Bryce's panicked breathing still echoing through the silent room. Jason stares at the device as if it is a venomous snake. His chest heaves, his eyes wild and uncomprehending, as the crushing reality of absolute financial ruin destroys the air in his lungs. Who the hell authorized that? Jason screams, his voice tearing at the seams, echoing off the oceanfront windows in sheer, unadulterated terror. Who has the authority to wipe out my entire life? I untie the black maid's apron from my waist, letting the cheap fabric pool onto the pristine floor right next to his dropped phone. I step forward, meeting his terrified gaze with eyes like absolute ice. I state clearly, offering him a perfectly calm, triumphant smile. I am the sole CEO of Coastal Horizon. The sheer weight of my declaration drops over the living room like a concrete vault. Richard Vance slowly lowers his empty hand, his sharp eyes darting from Jason's pale, sweat-drenched face to the unapologetic calm radiating from mine. The CEO does not need any further explanation. He is a man who deals in ruthless corporate takeovers, and he recognizes a perfectly executed slaughter when he sees one. He takes a deliberate step away from Jason, as if my husband has suddenly caught a highly contagious disease. The other financial executives immediately follow his lead, physically distancing themselves from the sinking ship that is Jason's career. Jason stands completely paralyzed. His mouth opens and closes, but his vocal cords refuse to produce a single sound. He cannot process the fact that the woman he spent a decade verbally breaking down has just legally acquired the very company that holds his entire financial existence hostage. But Brenda is entirely immune to logic. She violently shoves her way past two stunned socialites, her heavy diamond bracelets clanking loudly against her wrists. Her face is twisted into a mask of pure aristocratic outrage. She refuses to accept that the subservient daughter-in-law she has abused for 10 years possesses any real power. In her deeply arrogant mind, I am nothing but a common thief orchestrating a cheap parlor trick. You are a liar and a cyber criminal! Brenda shrieks, her voice echoing shrilly off the imported marble walls. You hacked into his accounts. You hacked the smart home. I am not going to stand here and watch you terrorize my guests with your deranged little hacker games. Before Jason can even attempt to stop her, Brenda aggressively yanks her cell phone from her designer handbag. Her manicured fingers stab at the screen. She presses the phone to her ear, her eyes glaring daggers into my skull. Hello, police! Brenda yells into the receiver, her voice pitching up into a hysterical theatrical wail designed to garner maximum sympathy. Send officers to the Coastal Horizon estate immediately. My deranged daughter-in-law has completely lost her mind. She has hacked the security gates and is holding 50 of my guests hostage. She is actively stealing millions of dollars from my son's bank accounts. You need to send a heavily armed unit right now to arrest her. Jason finally snaps out of his catatonic shock. The word police rips through his fog of denial like a bullet. He looks down at the hallway floor where the damning manila envelope I dropped earlier is still spilling its secrets. The highly classified wire transfer logs, the offshore gambling ledgers, and the undeniable proof of his massive corporate embezzlement are sitting right out in the open for any investigating officer to read. Mom, hang up the phone right now. Jason begs, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. He lunges toward her, frantically reaching for her cell phone. You do not understand what is happening. You cannot bring the cops here. Hang up the phone. But Brenda simply swats his hand away, completely oblivious to his terror. She genuinely believes she is saving her golden child. She turns her back on him, continuing to feed wild, exaggerated lies to the emergency dispatcher. Jamal realizes exactly what is about to happen. He looks at the embezzlement papers on the floor, then looks at the massive oceanfront windows, and makes a split-second decision. He abandons his humiliated wife, abandons his ruined Zoom call, and makes a desperate sprint for the back patio doors. He throws his entire body weight against the heavy glass handles, grunting with exertion. The doors do not budge a single inch. The biometric locks I altered through the smart hub hold firm. Jamal spins around in absolute panic and sprints toward the grand mahogany front doors. He grabs the brass handle, yanking it with all his strength. Nothing happens. He begins violently slamming his fists against the solid wood, screaming at the top of his lungs for someone to let him out before the police arrive. The country club elite, who Brenda had desperately tried to impress, are no longer feigning polite ignorance. The wealthy guests are eagerly pulling out their smartphones. I watch the camera flashes illuminate the room as 50 influential socialites record Jamal pounding on the door, Jason begging his mother to stop calling the cops, and Vanessa sobbing hysterically on the hallway floor. The high society reputation Brenda spent decades building is burning to ash in real time, captured in stunning high-definition video. Brenda finally ends her call, shoving her phone back into her purse, with a triumphant, malicious sneer. She marches right up to me, invading my personal space, her chest heaving with unearned authority. "The police are on their way, you ungrateful little witch!" Brenda hisses, jabbing a finger aggressively toward my face. "You really thought you could come into my home and steal from my family? I know exactly how to deal with street trash like you. Do you remember when your pathetic teenage brother dared to park his beat-up, rusty truck in front of my driveway 5 years ago? I did not even ask him to move it. I called the cops immediately and watched them humiliate him in handcuffs right on the pavement. I put him in his place, and I am going to thoroughly enjoy watching the police drag you out of here in shackles today." I do not blink. I look down at her pointing finger, then slowly meet her furious gaze. The absolute irony of her threat is almost poetic. The distinct piercing wail of police sirens suddenly cuts through the humid coastal air. The sound echoes from the main highway, growing rapidly louder as multiple patrol cars speed down the private beachfront road. The flashing red and blue lights begin to reflect off the tall oceanfront windows, casting erratic, chaotic shadows across the living room walls. Jason completely loses the last remaining shred of his sanity. The reality of his impending federal prison sentence shatters his mind. His face contorts into pure animalistic rage. The veins in his neck bulge dangerously against his skin. He lunges at me with terrifying speed, his hands shooting out to grab both of my shoulders in a punishing vice-like grip. He shakes me violently, his breath hot and reeking of panic. "Undo it!" Jason screams, his voice tearing at his throat, spittle flying across my face. "Get on your phone and undo the transfers. Unlock the doors. Erase the logs right now, or I swear to God I will end you." I do not panic. I do not scream for help. I plant my feet firmly on the marble, twist my torso with sharp, practiced leverage, and drive my forearms upward, easily breaking his aggressive grip. I shove him hard in the chest, sending him stumbling backward just as heavy, authoritative fists begin pounding violently against the mahogany. Before Jason can regain his balance, the heavy front doors are forcefully kicked open from the outside, and 4 uniformed local law enforcement officers storm into the grand entryway, their hands resting firmly on their service weapons. "Nobody move!" The lead officer commands his booming voice, freezing the entire chaotic room in an instant. "Ensure your hands are where I can see them. We received a call about a hostile situation. Who is the property owner here?" I slowly brush the wrinkles out of my shirt, step cleanly over the black apron lying on the floor, and raise my hand. "I am officer, and I would like to report a massive corporate theft." Brenda lets out a blood-curdling shriek, entirely drowning out my declaration. The 4 uniformed officers immediately flinch, their hands tightening reflexively on their heavy utility belts as they scan the sprawling, luxurious space for a physical threat. Brenda throws herself forward, stumbling dramatically toward the lead officer. She clutches her chest, her expensive diamond necklaces tangling together as she puts on an absolute masterclass in wealthy aristocratic victimhood. She points a violently shaking manicured finger directly at my face. "Arrest her!" Brenda screams, her voice cracking with manufactured terror. "She is trespassing and stealing our house. This deranged woman completely lost her mind, hacked our security gates, and is holding my VIP guests hostage. She is trying to drain my son's bank accounts right now. Put her in handcuffs before she hurts somebody." The officers exchange a rapid, uncertain glance. They are looking at a room packed with 50 elite terrified socialites in tailored suits and designer dresses, and then they look at me. I am standing perfectly still next to a discarded black maid's apron, casually holding my ground, while a highly connected local matriarch demands my immediate incarceration. The power dynamic in the room is aggressively skewed against me, and Jamal recognizes this instantly. Jamal decides this is his one and only chance to save his own skin. If he can get me dragged out of this house in shackles, he can quietly scoop up the damning offshore gambling ledgers and embezzlement logs scattered across the hardwood floor before the police notice them. He scrambles over to his dropped silver laptop bag, his hands shaking frantically as he unzips a hidden compartment. He pulls out a thick, official-looking document bound in blue legal foil. He shoves his way past a stunned catering manager and marches directly up to the lead officer. "I am a licensed commercial real estate broker, and I handle all transactions for this estate," Jamal states loudly, using his slickest, most authoritative sales voice to project an aura of absolute legitimacy. He aggressively shoves the document into the lead officer's chest. "This house belongs entirely to Jason's family trust. You are holding the certified property deed right there. That woman is a hostile intruder. She is undergoing a severe psychotic break and orchestrated this entire stunt to extort us. Remove her from the premises immediately." The lead officer takes the document. He flips open the heavy blue cover, his eyes rapidly scanning the dense legal jargon and the official-looking notary stamps decorating the bottom of the page. It is a brilliant, desperate forgery. Jamal and Jason had clearly prepared this fake deed months ago to protect the property from aggressive creditors, never anticipating they would need to use it to convince local law enforcement to arrest me. The officer closes the folder. His demeanor shifts instantly from cautious observation to authoritative command. He steps squarely into my personal space, his hand resting definitively on the bright yellow grip of his taser. "Ma'am, I am going to need you to step outside with us right now." The officer orders, his tone dropping an octave. "We can discuss your side of the story on the front lawn, but you need to exit this property immediately. Do not make this difficult." The wealthy guests in the living room begin murmuring in hushed, excited tones. Several of Jason's colleagues are actively recording the entire meltdown on their smartphones, eager to capture the exact moment the psychotic wife is forcibly removed by the police. Jason steps up behind the officers, rubbing his face, looking at me with a desperate, triumphant sneer. He truly believes he has won. He thinks his mother's theatrics and Jamal's forged paperwork have successfully neutralized the threat I pose. I look at the officer's hand resting on his weapon. I look at Jason's arrogant, recovering smirk. I look at Brenda wiping away her completely fake tears. And I absolutely refuse to move a single muscle. I stand my ground on the polished marble, my posture straight and unyielding. The aggressive demands from the police perfectly mirror the most humiliating night of my entire life. It was my 30th birthday. Brenda had insisted on throwing a lavish catered dinner party at her country club, ostensibly to celebrate my milestone. But the moment the guests arrived, the evening was completely hijacked to celebrate Jason landing a new corporate account. When I stood up and tapped my glass to give a simple toast to my own birthday, Jason had forcefully grabbed the microphone right out of my hands. He laughed loudly into the speakers, telling the entire room of laughing executives that his lightweight wife had consumed far too much champagne. When I tried to defend myself, Brenda signaled the private club security. Two massive guards had placed their hands on my shoulders and physically escorted me out of the ballroom so I would not ruin their prestigious celebration. I spent my 30th birthday locked in a dark, empty coat room, listening to the muffled sounds of my husband and his mother toasting to their own brilliance. I sat on that cold, hardwood floor and made a quiet, unbreakable vow. I promised myself that I would never, under any circumstances, allow this family to silence me or physically remove me from a room ever again. "I am not stepping outside," I state clearly, my voice slicing through the heavy tension in the entryway. "That document is a fraudulent piece of paper, and if you attempt to remove me from my own property, you will be participating in an illegal eviction. Undo it, Jason suddenly screams, shoving his way past the second officer and grabbing me violently by the shoulders. The facade of the calm, victimized husband completely shatters. His fingers dig brutally into my collarbone as he shakes me. Undo the account transfers right now, or I swear to God I will make sure you spend the rest of your life locked in a psychiatric ward. I easily break his desperate grip, twisting my shoulders and shoving his hands away with practiced force. The lead officer shouts a warning command, unsnapping the holster of his taser and raising it toward my chest. He is 1 second away from firing. Before the officer can pull the trigger, the deep rumbling purr of a massive engine vibrates through the open front doors. A sleek, heavily armored black Maybach glides aggressively up the sweeping circular driveway, completely ignoring the chaotic jam of trapped catering vans. The luxury vehicle abruptly parks diagonally across the pristine stone pavers, directly blocking the path of the 3 police cruisers. The heavy reinforced car door swings open. A man steps out onto the driveway. He is wearing a razor-sharp charcoal bespoke suit that practically screams lethal corporate power. He adjusts his cuffs with absolute terrifying calm, completely unfazed by the flashing police lights illuminating his face. In his right hand, he carries a thick, heavy leather briefcase, stamped explicitly with a gleaming silver federal seal. It is Oliver, my fiercely ruthless powerhouse corporate attorney. Oliver strides effortlessly past the stunned catering crew. He walks straight through the massive mahogany front doors, stepping directly into the line of fire between me and the local police force. He does not even blink at the raised taser. "Officers," Oliver announces, his deep, resonant voice commanding absolute, unquestionable authority over the entire room. "I highly suggest you step away from my client this exact second before you formally implicate yourselves in a massive multi-million-dollar federal fraud investigation." The lead officer lowers his weapon instantly, taking a cautious step backward. The sheer weight of Oliver's presence, combined with the gleaming federal seal on his leather briefcase, completely shifts the power dynamic in the grand entryway. The other 3 officers immediately drop their hands from their heavy utility belts, exchanging nervous, uncertain glances. No local cop wants to accidentally stumble into the crosshairs of a massive federal investigation, especially not in a room packed with 50 influential executives holding up their recording smartphones. Brenda, completely incapable of reading the room and entirely addicted to her own delusions of grandeur, refuses to surrender her theatrical performance. She shoves her way past Jason, pointing her diamond-covered finger directly at Oliver's bespoke chest. "Who do you think you are?" Brenda screeches, her voice echoing painfully off the high ceilings, her face mottled with aristocratic rage. "You cannot just barge into my home. That woman is a cyber criminal. She is stealing our money and holding my VIP guests hostage. Arrest her right now, or I will personally see to it that all of your badges are revoked before morning." Oliver does not even grant Brenda the dignity of a response. He looks right through her as if she is nothing more than a minor irritating stain on the polished marble floor. He stops directly in front of the lead officer, snaps open the brass clasps of his briefcase with a sharp, definitive click, and pulls out a pristine, heavy parchment document. It is stamped with multiple authentic raised state seals and features a highly complex iridescent watermark that catches the glittering light of the chandelier. Officer Oliver says, his voice smooth, terrifyingly calm, and projecting effortlessly across the dead silent living room. "I strongly advise you to carefully review this certified property record and compare it to the fraudulent garbage that sweating amateur just handed you." The lead officer takes the authentic document, holding it up next to Jamal's blue folder. The difference in legitimacy is immediately glaringly obvious. The authentic deed bears the unmistakable weight of genuine federal authorization, while Jamal's paperwork suddenly looks like a cheap, hastily printed replica. Oliver reaches out and plucks Jamal's fake deed directly from the officer's hands. He turns his razor-sharp gaze toward Jamal. The broker physically shrinks back, his shoulders hunching as he clutches his empty laptop bag to his chest like a useless shield. Oliver systematically dismantles Jamal's forged deed in front of the entire room. He points out the fabricated parcel identification number, the revoked notary stamp, and the blatantly traced digital signatures. With a swift, aggressive motion, Oliver rips the heavy blue foil cover and the forged pages right down the middle, letting the shredded pieces flutter pathetically to the floor to join the scattered embezzlement logs. That piece of trash was a magnificent piece of fiction, Oliver announces, ensuring every single executive in the room hears the absolute ruin of Jason's family. You see, when Jamal and Jason realized my client was accumulating massive wealth through her private enterprise, they panicked. They knew a divorce was imminent, so they conspired to illegally transfer the title of this $20 million estate into Jason's family trust to hide it from the asset division. Jason frantically shakes his head, his face entirely drained of color, his skin taking on a sickly, translucent pallor. He looks around at the staring executives, his mouth opening and closing in silent desperation. "No, that is my house. I signed the transfer papers myself. I executed the digital deed last week." Oliver smiles a cold, predatory expression that makes Jason swallow hard. "That is exactly right, Jason. You proudly signed it." And Jamal, acting as the licensed broker, officially facilitated and filed the fraudulent transfer. But you both missed one tiny catastrophic detail. Coastal Horizon LLC is merely a subsidiary holding company. The actual ironclad deed to this beachfront estate is locked securely in a blind, irrevocable trust. Oliver pauses, letting the silence stretch so tight it threatens to snap. He looks directly at Brenda, who is suddenly grasping her throat in horror, her diamond necklaces clicking together as she trembles. "The trust is exclusively under the names of Thomas and Diane Oliver," continues his voice ringing out clearly. "Natalie's parents." Brenda lets out a sharp, strangled gasp, swaying dangerously on her designer heels as the devastating truth finally pierces her arrogance. She does not own this house. Her son does not own this house. She has been throwing a lavish, arrogant housewarming party, bragging to high society elites, in a mansion entirely owned by the exact parents she spent a decade calling poor, uneducated trash. The document Jamal facilitated, and you so arrogantly signed last week, was a bait document, Oliver states, turning his attention back to Jason and Jamal. "It was a digital honeypot. We set the trap, and you two walked right into it, driven by your own insatiable greed. By knowingly executing that transfer with fraudulent signatures on a ghost asset, you crossed international banking lines. You committed a Class B felony. You left a permanent, undeniable digital trail of wire fraud, grand larceny, and gross embezzlement." Jamal completely loses his mind. The polished, wealthy broker facade shatters into a million jagged pieces. He drops his silver laptop bag. It hits the floor with a heavy thud. He throws his hands up in the air, backing away from Jason, as if his brother-in-law is covered in radioactive waste. "I did not know," Jamal stutters, his voice cracking hysterically as he desperately tries to save his own skin. "I swear to God, I had no idea it was a bait document. Jason gave me the paperwork. Jason told me it was a standard familial asset transfer. I just processed the filings. I am a victim here. He lied to me." Oliver lets out a harsh, barking laugh that completely silences Jamal's pathetic defense. He reaches back into his briefcase and pulls out a massive 2-inch thick binder, overflowing with bank statements and legal complaints. He drops the heavy binder right onto the marble floor next to the shredded deed. "Do not insult our intelligence," Jamal Oliver says, stepping closer and forcing the terrified broker to retreat until his back hits the glass console. "My client spent the last 6 months meticulously digging through Jason's hidden accounts, and she found exactly how you operate. You have a deeply documented history of preying on vulnerable clients." Oliver looks around the room, making sure every single recording smartphone captures the next words. "3 years ago, you manipulated an elderly widow into transferring her late husband's commercial properties into a shell company you secretly controlled." Oliver details, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "You drained her retirement accounts to fund your unregulated gambling addictions, falsely promising her aggressive returns on luxury developments that never actually existed." You've been running this exact same real estate scam for years using Jason's corporate backend to launder the stolen funds. You are not a victim, Jamal. You are a highly practiced predator. Jamal's eyes dart frantically toward the front door, then toward the locked patio exits. The smart home system is still fully engaged. The electronic deadbolts hum quietly, trapping him inside the spectacular glass cage he tried to steal. The caterers are still locked outside. The guests are actively recording him. There is absolutely nowhere left to run. He looks at the local police officers, opening his mouth to beg for some sort of leniency, but the lead officer just shakes his head and steps back, crossing his arms. Oliver smoothly steps aside, creating a clear path through the grand entryway. From the shadows of the front porch, a new figure emerges. He is a tall, imposing man wearing a dark tactical jacket with a gold badge clipped prominently to his belt. He steps directly into the light of the chandelier, holding a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. An agent from the State Real Estate Commission steps out from behind Oliver. He looks at Jamal with absolute disgust. Jamal, your broker's license is hereby revoked permanently. The agent announces, his voice echoing over the quiet murmurs of the stunned crowd. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. The cold, heavy steel of the handcuffs snaps shut around Jamal's wrists with a harsh metallic click that rings out like a gunshot in the silent room. The sound shatters whatever fragile illusion of control Jamal had left. He feels the cold metal bite into his skin, and the terrifying reality of federal prison crashes down on his meticulously groomed head. The state agent forcefully turns him around, shoving him toward the waiting local officers. Jamal looks wildly around the room. He sees his wife Vanessa backing away from him, her hands clamped over her mouth in absolute horror. He sees the wealthy investors pulling out their phones, eagerly filming his complete public humiliation. And then he sees Jason. Jason is shrinking back against the grand staircase, his eyes darting toward the hallway, already calculating a desperate, cowardly exit strategy. He is perfectly willing to let Jamal take the entire fall for their combined financial crimes. Jamal completely snaps. The polished, fast-talking broker vanishes, replaced by a cornered animal desperate to drag his co-conspirator down into the pit with him. "I am not taking the fall for you, Jamal!" roars his voice, tearing violently through his throat as he lunges against the grip of the arresting officer. This was entirely his idea. Jason told me to forge those signatures. He drove to my office, handed me the fake notary stamps, and begged me to process the deed. Jason freezes his face, morphing from sheer panic into lethal cornered fury. "Shut your mouth, Jamal!" Jason hisses, his hands curling into tight, shaking fists. "You do not know what you are saying. You are having a panic attack." "I have the bank receipts!" Jamal screams louder, fighting wildly against the two officers now struggling to restrain his thrashing body. "You paid me a $70,000 bribe to file that fake deed, and you did not even use your own money." He used company funds. He wired the bribe directly from his corporate expense account at Vance Financial. I have the digital ledger in my car to prove it. The words "company funds" drop into the living room like a live grenade. Jason lets out a guttural, animalistic roar of pure rage. The instinct for self-preservation completely overrides any remaining shred of his upper-class sanity. He launches himself off the staircase, closing the distance between them with terrifying speed. He ignores the police, ignores his mother, ignores the crowd, and tackles Jamal directly in the center of the living room. The two men crash violently onto a massive glass coffee table, shattering it into thousands of razor-sharp fragments. Brenda lets out a piercing, hysterical shriek as her prized imported Ming Dynasty vase is caught in the crossfire, crashing to the marble floor and exploding into fine porcelain dust. Her entire life's work, the careful curation of wealth, the desperate social climbing, the perfectly staged elegance, is literally being crushed beneath the heavy, frantic boots of her own family members. Vanessa begins screaming hysterically, clutching her hair as she watches her husband and her brother tear into each other like feral street thugs. Jason throws a brutal, uncoordinated punch that connects heavily with Jamal's jaw, sending a spray of blood across the pristine white Persian rug. Jamal, severely disadvantaged by the handcuffs, violently kicks out his legs, catching Jason squarely in the ribs and sending him crashing backward into a towering floral arrangement. Roses and stagnant water splash across the designer gowns of the retreating guests. The beautiful, carefully curated illusion of the Addams family wealth and superiority is entirely obliterated. The 50 elite socialites who Brenda spent a decade desperately trying to impress are now pressing themselves against the walls in absolute disgust. They are holding up their phones eagerly, recording every bloody, pathetic second of the golden son and the wealthy son-in-law completely destroying a multi-million-dollar living room. They are watching them bleed and thrash on the floor over stolen money and forged documents. The aristocratic high society reputation Brenda built on my constant humiliation is burning to ash right in front of her eyes. The 4 local officers finally recover from the shock of the sudden violence. They swarm the 2 men shouting aggressive commands. 2 officers grab Jamal by his suit jacket, violently hauling him backward and pinning him against a marble pillar. The lead officer and his partner dive onto Jason. They grab his flailing arms, twist them forcefully behind his back, and slam his face directly into the sharp, shattered glass debris covering the floor. Jason grunts in pain, a fresh cut opening across his cheek as the officer drives a heavy knee into his spine to keep him pinned. "Stay down," the officer barks, pulling out his own set of handcuffs and ratcheting them tightly around Jason's wrists. "Do not move another muscle or you will be charged with assaulting a police officer." The living room falls into a heavy, panting silence, broken only by the sound of Vanessa sobbing and Brenda hyperventilating in the corner. The elegant housewarming party looks like the aftermath of a riot. I stand perfectly still next to Oliver, watching the man who emotionally terrorized me for 10 years, lying broken, bleeding, and handcuffed in a pile of shattered glass. From the back of the terrified crowd of guests, a tall, imposing figure slowly steps forward. The crowd parts for him, instantly recognizing the sheer gravity of his presence. It is Richard Vance, the ruthless CEO of the financial firm, where Jason spent his entire career aggressively climbing the corporate ladder. The man Jason idolized and feared. Vance walks deliberately to the center of the ruined room. His polished leather shoes crunch over the shattered glass and porcelain dust. He looks down at the black manila envelope I dropped earlier, the one exposing Jason's offshore accounts. Then he looks at Jamal, restrained and bleeding by the pillar. Finally, his cold, calculating gaze drops to Jason, who is breathing heavily against the floor, his eyes widening in absolute paralyzing terror as he looks up at his boss. "You used company funds to pay off a gambling debt and bribe a broker." Vance asks, his voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying a lethal edge that slices through the room. "Richard, please." Jason begs, his voice cracking completely, abandoning any remaining dignity as he squirms helplessly against the marble floor. "I can explain. It was a temporary loan. I was going to put the money back. I just needed to float the margin call for a few weeks." Vance shakes his head slowly, a look of profound, icy disgust settling over his sharp features. "You do not steal from me," Jason Vance states with brutal finality. "You are fired effectively immediately. I am contacting our legal department from my car. I am ordering a full, uncompromising forensic audit of your entire department by tomorrow morning. Every single account you have ever touched will be investigated, and I will personally hand the findings over to the federal prosecutor." Richard Vance does not wait for an apology or a pathetic explanation. The CEO turns on his heel, his expensive leather shoes crunching over the shattered porcelain and broken glass, and walks straight out the open front doors. He does not look back. The absolute suffocating silence he leaves in his wake is heavier than any screaming match could ever be. Jason's entire corporate identity, his prestigious career, his unvested stock options, and his 6-figure salary have completely evaporated in the span of 10 seconds. The 2 local police officers finally move. They grab Jason roughly by the biceps, hauling him up from the ruined Persian rug. Jason's knees buckle instantly. He is dead weight in their arms, his pristine, custom-tailored suit completely destroyed. Bright red blood from the fresh cut on his cheek drips heavily onto his crisp white collar, staining the expensive fabric. He looks like a beaten, cornered animal gasping for air as the officers lock his arms securely behind his back. The lead officer shifts his stance, keeping a firm grip on Jason's shoulder, and turns his attention back to Oliver. The officer gestures toward the hysterical woman sobbing against the far wall. Dispatch reported an active theft in progress, the officer states, his voice projecting clearly over the quiet murmurs of the stunned socialites. The 911 caller claimed her daughter-in-law was electronically stealing $150,000. She demanded an immediate arrest. Oliver does not miss a beat. He snaps open the secondary compartment of his leather briefcase and pulls out a thick, meticulously organized stack of banking records printed on heavy watermarked financial paper. He hands the file directly to the officer. "My client is not stealing a single dime, officer," Oliver replies, his tone smooth, venomous, and dripping with legal certainty. "She is reclaiming stolen assets, and the amount in question is significantly larger than what this hysterical woman claimed on the emergency line." I step forward, walking slowly across the marble floor, until I am standing less than 2 feet away from my bleeding, handcuffed husband. Jason refuses to meet my eyes. He stares at the floor, his chest heaving, his jaw trembling uncontrollably. "Jason, you really thought you could hide your massive offshore losses forever?" I say, my voice ringing out clearly in the silent room, ensuring every single guest holding a recording smartphone captures every word. "When you opened your banking app this morning, you probably thought the zero balance was a temporary glitch. But your accounts are not just empty. They are actively sitting at negative $400,000. Jason's head snaps up. His bloodshot eyes widen in absolute horror. He shakes his head frantically, spittle flying from his lips. "No, Jason," chokes out his voice, a pathetic, raspy whisper. "That is impossible. You cannot overdraft a private wealth account by that much. The bank would never authorize it." "They did not authorize an overdraft," I reply, staring right through him. "I submitted the unredacted proof to the Federal Banking Commission yesterday morning. I handed over the digital IP logs, the routing numbers, and the forged electronic signatures. I gave them undeniable proof of the $200,000 personal loan you took out entirely under my name." The bank triggered an immediate fraud recall protocol. They froze every single asset tied to your Social Security number, forcefully clawed back the initial principal, and applied an aggressive, massive penalty levy against your remaining balances. Jason physically sags against the officers. If they were not holding him up by his arms, he would be a puddle on the floor. "Do you remember our anniversary trip to Napa 2 years ago?" I ask, stepping even closer, forcing him to look at the woman he chronically underestimated. "We were sitting on the balcony of that luxury vineyard. I checked my phone and saw my credit score had suddenly plummeted by 80 points. I was terrified. I asked you about it. I told you I thought someone had stolen my identity." Jason squeezes his eyes shut, turning his head away as the memory traps him. "You laughed at me." I continue, my voice dropping to a deadly, icy calm. "You poured yourself another glass of expensive Cabernet, called me paranoid, and told me I was obsessing over a meaningless computer glitch. You sat there drinking wine paid for with my stolen credit, looked me dead in the eye, and called me crazy. You made me feel like I was losing my mind. You made me feel financially illiterate. But you were the thief. You took that loan to cover your first massive offshore gambling deficit, and you shackled the debt entirely to me." Brenda lets out a loud, wretched wail from the corner of the room. She slides down the wall, her designer gown pooling around her on the floor. The wealthy country club elite she spent a decade trying to impress are now whispering in absolute disgust. They are zooming in with their cameras, capturing the total destruction of the Addams family empire. Brenda hides her face in her hands, completely broken by the public spectacle of her golden son being exposed as a common, desperate fraud. "You ruined me." Jason sobs, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine as he hangs his head in defeat. "You ruined my entire life. You ruined yourself, Jason," I reply, turning my back on him. I just finally turned on the lights. The lead officer has heard enough. He looks at the ironclad banking records in his hand, looks at the forged real estate deed Oliver destroyed, and looks at the bleeding, defeated man in his custody. The officer tightens his grip on Jason's shoulder and forcibly turns him toward the grand mahogany doors. Jason Adams, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, grand larceny, and identity theft. The officer announces, his authoritative voice echoing off the high ceilings and carrying out into the humid coastal air. You have the right to remain silent. The metallic rattle of the handcuffs securing Jason's wrists acts as the final deafening nail in the coffin of Brenda's carefully constructed reality. The words "remain silent" hover in the humid coastal air, and the sheer finality of them shatters the matriarch completely. Brenda lets out a raw, guttural sob that sounds entirely foreign, coming from a woman who prides herself on absolute emotional control. Her knees give out. She collapses onto the floor, her expensive silk gown soaking up the spilled water from the ruined floral arrangements. She does not care about her image anymore. She does not care about the 50 elite socialites who are watching her with wide, horrified eyes. The aristocratic facade is gone, replaced by a desperate, terrified mother watching her golden child being hauled away to federal prison. Brenda drops to her hands and knees. She scrambles forward, ignoring the jagged shards of shattered glass and broken porcelain digging into her palms. She crawls directly across the ruined Persian rug until she reaches my feet. Her manicured fingers, heavily weighed down by platinum rings, desperately grab the hem of my skirt. She looks up at me, her perfect makeup completely destroyed by a flood of panicked tears. Please, Natalie. Brenda wails, her voice cracking as she tugs frantically at my fabric. He is your husband. You know he is a good man. He just made a terrible mistake. You cannot let them take him away like this. Tell them to stop. Tell the lawyer to drop the charges. I will do anything. I will pay you back every single penny. Just please do not let them put my son in a cage. The entire living room holds its collective breath. The only sounds are the heavy, erratic breathing of Jason as the officers haul him to his feet, and the pathetic, ragged sobs of his mother clinging to my ankles. The wealthy guests, the country club presidents, the charity board directors all watch in absolute stunned silence as the woman who ruled their social circles degrades herself on the floor. I look down at the woman who spent the last decade making my life a living hell. I look at her shaking hands, her ruined makeup, and her desperate, pleading eyes. I do not feel an ounce of pity. I do not feel a shred of sympathy. I feel nothing but cold, absolute clarity. I plant my feet firmly and slowly pry her trembling fingers off my clothing, stepping back so she is left grasping at empty air. Why are you asking me for help, Brenda? I ask, my voice projecting crisp and loud across the silent room, ensuring every single guest hears the absolute truth of our dynamic. You made it perfectly clear to everyone in this room what you think of me. When I walked through those front doors an hour ago, didn't you loudly announce to your friends that I was nothing but a glorified math tutor? Didn't you tell them I lacked the intelligence to understand Jason's complex corporate world? I tilt my head, staring down at her weeping face. So tell me, Brenda, why ask a glorified math tutor for legal salvation? Brenda chokes on a sob, her eyes darting around the room, realizing that her own vicious insults are now locking the prison cell door behind her son. She tries to reach for me again, shaking her head wildly. I did not mean it, she stammers, her voice laced with desperation. I was just talking. You know how I get. We are family, Natalie. Family protects each other. Family. I repeat, letting out a sharp, humorless laugh that echoes off the marble walls. You do not know the first thing about family. Let me remind you exactly how you treat family. 3 years ago, I had emergency abdominal surgery. Jason was supposedly too busy closing a massive corporate deal to come to the hospital. He promised me you would be there to take me home. I woke up from general anesthesia completely alone. I step closer, forcing Brenda to look up at me as I recount the exact agonizing memory. I sat in a freezing plastic wheelchair in the hospital discharge lounge for 4 hours. The nurses kept asking me where my ride was. I called your cell phone 7 times before you finally decided to answer. Do you remember what you told me, Brenda? You told me you could not possibly pick me up because you had a standing gel nail appointment at the salon and your technician hated late arrivals. You told a woman recovering from major surgery to call a taxi because your manicure was more important than my safety. Brenda flinches visibly, shrinking back against the floor as the crowd murmurs in collective disgust. Several of the socialites who previously hung on her every word now look at her with undisguised contempt. I called a rideshare service that day. I continue, my voice relentless. I threw up in the back of a stranger's car because the pain medication made me violently nauseous. I dragged myself up the stairs of our house and passed out on the bathroom floor. You did not even call to check if I made it home alive. You never cared if I was family, until the exact second you realized I held the keys to your son's prison cell. Brenda covers her face, weeping hysterically, completely, unable to defend herself against the undeniable truth of her own cruelty. The lead police officer ignores her breakdown entirely, giving Jason a firm shove toward the front entryway. Before they drag him out, I reach into the pocket of my tailored trousers. I pull out a crisp, perfectly folded white document. It is not a legal threat. It is a highly detailed, legally binding invoice compiled by my forensic accountants. I drop it directly into Brenda's lap. She jumps slightly, staring down at the paper as if it might detonate. By the way, I announce, ensuring Oliver and the police hear every word. Jason did not just steal from me to fund his offshore gambling addiction. He systematically drained my accounts to fund your entire high society lifestyle. That diamond necklace you are wearing. Your monthly country club membership dues. The lease on your imported sports car. The catered food your guests are eating right now. Jason paid for every single bit of it using credit lines fraudulently opened in my name. Brenda stares at the invoice, her hands shaking violently as she reads the meticulously itemized list of her stolen luxuries. The total sits at the bottom of the page in bold, damning print. Jason stole $230,000 from me over the last 4 years, just to keep you looking rich. I state, my voice devoid of any emotion. You have enjoyed a wonderful, luxurious ride on my stolen dime, Brenda. But the ride is officially over. This invoice is due in exactly 15 days. If the funds are not wired into my account by the deadline, my attorneys will immediately place a lien on your house. Brenda's mouth drops open, a silent scream caught in her throat as the heavy oak front doors swing wide. The harsh red and blue strobe lights from the waiting squad cars slice through the humid coastal air, illuminating the absolute destruction of the living room. The local police aggressively march Jason and Jamal out into the night. Jason does not look back. He keeps his head bowed, his shoulders hunched, completely broken by the reality of his impending federal prison sentence. Jamal is still loudly sobbing, his frantic pleas for a plea deal fading as the police shove him into the back of a cruiser. With the primary architects of the fraud removed from the premises, the atmosphere in the room shifts from explosive violence to a suffocating, terrifying silence. I turn away from the open doorway and look down at the 2 women still kneeling on the ruined Persian rug. I slowly lift my arm and check the face of my watch. It is exactly 8:45, I announce, my voice ringing out with absolute, unquestionable authority. You have exactly 15 minutes to pack whatever fits in your hands and get off my parents' property. If you are still standing in this house at 9 o'clock, I will have the remaining officers arrest you both for criminal trespassing. Brenda stares up at me, her eyes wide and bloodshot. She suddenly realizes that her son is gone, her stolen wealth is gone, and her aristocratic immunity has completely evaporated. Desperate to salvage any remaining shred of her social standing, she scrambles to her feet. She turns toward the 50 VIP guests who are still huddled near the foyer, their designer clothes splashed with stagnant flower water, and their phones still actively recording the spectacle. Martha Brenda begs, her voice cracking as she reaches out toward a woman dripping in diamonds. Please tell your driver to help us. Diane, we have brunch at the club on Tuesday. You cannot just leave us here. Martha and Diane pull their mink shawls tighter around their shoulders. They exchange a look of profound, undisguised disgust. Martha physically steps backward, practically climbing over the shattered porcelain of Brenda's prized Ming vase, just to avoid letting Brenda's trembling hand brush against her coat. I think we need to leave. Diane mutters loudly, looking at Brenda as if she is a contagious disease. This entire family is completely radioactive. The exodus is immediate and brutal. The high society elites, the charity board directors, the country club presidents, the very people Brenda spent a decade ruthlessly clawing her way up to impress, turn their backs on her. They file out the front door in a hurried, panicked mass, whispering furiously to each other about the federal wire fraud and the stolen house. They do not offer a single word of comfort. They simply abandon Brenda to the wreckage of her own arrogance. Seeing the guests flee, Vanessa finally snaps out of her shocked paralysis. The reality of the 15-minute deadline crashes into her brain. She scrambles up from the floor, her expensive silk dress torn at the knee from the shattered coffee table glass. She sprints toward the grand staircase, desperate to reach the master suite and hoard her expensive jewelry. But Oliver steps smoothly into her path, crossing his arms and blocking the stairs entirely. "You are not permitted upstairs," Oliver states, his tone as solid and immovable as a brick wall. "My client said you can take what fits in your hands. You may collect your coats from the downstairs closet. That is all." Vanessa lets out a strangled shriek of frustration. She spins around, her eyes darting frantically across the ruined living room. She spots a heavy-duty black plastic garbage bag left behind by the terrified catering staff. She lunges for it, ripping it open, and runs to the hallway coat closet. She begins aggressively ripping designer trench coats, cashmere scarves, and luxury handbags off their hangers, shoving them haphazardly into the plastic trash bag like a common looter. She fills the bag until the plastic stretches and threatens to tear. Dragging the heavy garbage bag across the marble floor, she stops directly in front of me. Her mascara is running down her cheeks in thick, dark streaks. She looks pathetic, stripped of the smug, condescending superiority she always weaponized against me. "Natalie, please," Vanessa cries, her voice shaking with a sudden, highly manufactured vulnerability. "I am your sister-in-law. We are family. You know I had nothing to do with Jason's accounts. You cannot just throw me out into the street with a garbage bag. Show some sisterly mercy." The sheer audacity of the request makes the air in the living room drop 10 degrees. Oliver narrows his eyes, his posture tensing. The few remaining catering staff freeze in place, sensing the lethal shift in my demeanor. I look at Vanessa's tear-stained face, and I do not feel a single ounce of compassion. "Sisterly mercy." I repeat, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper that commands total silence. "You want the same sisterly mercy you showed me 2 years ago when you laughed at my miscarriage." Vanessa physically recoils as if I just slapped her across the face. She takes a stumbling step backward, shaking her head frantically. "No," she stammers, her face draining of all color. I did not mean it like that." "Do not try to deny it, Vanessa." I command, stepping forward and forcing her to hold my gaze. I was bleeding in the hospital bathroom, completely shattered, mourning a child I desperately wanted. And you stood right here in my kitchen holding a mimosa and told Jason that my body was obviously too broken to carry a pregnancy anyway. You laughed. You literally laughed and said it was a blessing in disguise because I clearly lacked the maternal instinct to raise an Adams. Brenda gasps from the corner, covering her mouth. The caterers stare at Vanessa with unhidden revulsion. The absolute, undeniable cruelty of the memory hangs heavy and toxic over the shattered room. Vanessa opens her mouth desperately, trying to formulate an excuse, trying to spin her horrific words into a misunderstanding. But the absolute disgust radiating from every single person still standing in the house silences her instantly. "Your 15 minutes are up," I state, pointing a rigid finger directly toward the open front door. "Get out." Vanessa swallows hard, her throat bobbing. She grabs the neck of her plastic garbage bag, hauling it over her shoulder. She stomps her ruined designer heels over the blood-stained Persian rug, marching toward the entryway, clearly determined to salvage one last shred of her arrogant dignity by speeding away in her luxury car. She throws the front door open wide and storms out onto the front porch, but she stops dead in her tracks. The loud rhythmic beeping of a commercial vehicle echoes through the humid coastal night air. A massive heavy-duty tow truck is actively backing up the long, circular driveway, its amber hazard lights flashing brightly against the manicured landscaping. A burly man in a neon safety vest steps out of the cab, unspools a thick, heavy steel cable and begins hooking it directly to the front axle of Vanessa's brand-new custom white Range Rover. Vanessa drops her overstuffed garbage bag of stolen designer coats. It hits the aggregate driveway with a dull thud. She lets out a sound that is half scream and half sob, sprinting down the front porch steps with her arms flailing wildly in the humid air. "What are you doing?" Vanessa shrieks, inserting her body between the heavy steel tow cable and the pristine grille of her luxury SUV. "You cannot touch my car. Unhook it right now before I call the police. The police are already inside. Unhook it." The tow truck driver does not even blink. He is a massive man with a thick beard and zero patience for wealthy suburban tantrums. He reaches into the front pocket of his neon vest, pulls out a damp, crumpled clipboard, and rips off a bright pink slip of paper. He shoves it directly against Vanessa's chest. "Repo order," the driver grunts, his voice completely devoid of sympathy. "Payments are 90 days past due, ma'am. The bank officially seized the asset at 8 o'clock tonight. Step away from the vehicle, or I will have the officers inside arrest you for interfering with a lawful repossession." Vanessa stares at this pink slip, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "This is a mistake," she stammers, her voice dropping to a panicked whisper. "My husband pays for this. Jason pays the lease. It is on auto pay." The realization hits her with the force of a freight train. Jason's accounts are frozen. The offshore money is gone. The fraudulent credit lines are locked. There is no auto pay. There is no safety net. Without the stolen wealth Jason was funneling into their accounts to keep up appearances, Vanessa is instantly, undeniably destitute. She backs away from the grille of the Range Rover, her hands trembling as the tow truck driver finishes hooking up the axle and engages the hydraulic winch. The front tires of her ultimate status symbol lift off the pavement. A loud crack of thunder rolls across the sky, vibrating through the ground beneath our feet. The heavy, suffocating coastal humidity finally breaks. The rain does not start as a drizzle. It unleashes as a torrential, unforgiving deluge. Thick sheets of freezing water crash down from the black sky, instantly soaking the driveway, the manicured lawns, and the women standing outside. Brenda stumbles out the front doors a moment later. She is clutching a single leather jewelry box to her chest like a life preserver. Her elaborate, heavily hair-sprayed updo collapses under the sudden downpour, plastering wet strands of hair across her ruined makeup. She looks wildly at the tow truck, hauling Vanessa's car down the driveway, then looks out at the mile-long winding road leading to the community gates. They have absolutely no transportation, they have no money, they have 15 minutes. Vanessa wordlessly bends down in the pouring rain. She grabs the twisted neck of the black garbage bag and begins dragging it down the abrasive aggregate driveway. The thin plastic immediately tears, scraping expensive silk scarves and cashmere sweaters directly against the wet pavement. Brenda follows closely behind her, her imported silk gown clinging awkwardly to her shivering frame, her expensive heels slipping on the wet asphalt. They look pathetic. Two women who spent their entire lives judging others for their lack of wealth, now reduced to dragging garbage bags through a thunderstorm. As they trudge down the long driveway, the two local police cruisers pull out from the front of the estate. The squad cars roll slowly past the drenched women, their red and blue strobe lights reflecting brightly off the puddles. Through the rain-streaked windows of the back seats, Jason and Jamal look out at their mother and wife. Brenda cries out, reaching a desperate hand toward the passing vehicles, but the cruisers do not stop. They accelerate, driving straight through a deep puddle and splashing a heavy wave of muddy water directly against Brenda's legs. I turn away from the open doorway and walk back through the empty, silent living room. I step over the shattered glass of the coffee table, bypass the ruined Ming vase, and walk straight out the French doors onto the master suite balcony. The cold rain beats against the glass railing, but the balcony is deeply covered, offering a perfect elevated view of the entire estate. I reach over to the patio table and pick up the sweating glass of the margarita Brenda had aggressively shoved into my hand just an hour ago. The ice has melted, but the tequila still burns perfectly against the back of my throat. I take a slow, satisfying sip, watching the two tiny figures of Brenda and Vanessa shrinking into the dark, rainy distance. For 4 years, I sat in silence. I listened to them call me a glorified math tutor. I listened to them mock my practical clothes, my lack of social ambition, my quiet nights spent at home. They thought I was boring. They thought I was stupid. They had absolutely no idea that while Jason was out at the country club spending money he did not have. I was grinding through 80-hour work weeks. I was writing complex cybersecurity algorithms. I was building a digital infrastructure company from a cheap laptop on our kitchen island. I was negotiating massive multi-million-dollar enterprise contracts with international tech conglomerates while they were busy laughing at me. I built an empire in total secrecy. I funneled every single massive payout into an ironclad blind trust. I watched Jason forge my signature to steal a fraction of what I was actually worth, and I let him do it. I laid the digital trap, handed him the rope, and waited patiently for him to hang himself. I take another sip of the margarita, the sweet taste of absolute victory settling into my bones. The estate is finally quiet. The toxic, suffocating presence of the Addams family has been completely excised from my property. But the silence does not last. Over the sound of this pouring rain, a low, aggressive engine roars to life at the bottom of the hill. A sleek, bright red Ferrari cuts through the gloom, its high-beam headlights illuminating the heavy sheets of rain. The sports car pulls directly up to the security gates of my estate. The driver's side door swings open. A stunning, glamorous woman steps out into the storm. She is wearing sky-high stilettos and a skin-tight crimson dress that leaves absolutely nothing to the imagination. She does not even flinch at the rain. She struts purposefully to the glowing intercom panel mounted on the stone pillar. She presses the buzzer. The external speakers of my smart home system crackle to life, broadcasting her voice loud and clear across the entire empty property. Jason. The woman purrs, her voice dripping with practiced seductive honey. Baby, open the gate. I am here for our romantic weekend. I lean closer to the intercom microphone. The heavy driving rain masks the sound of my slow, steady breathing. Jason is not here, I say, keeping my voice perfectly smooth and remarkably hospitable over the crackling speaker. But you can come in out of the storm. The gate is open. I press the release button. The heavy iron security gates swing inward with a mechanical hum. The Ferrari engine revs loudly, its wide tires splashing aggressively through the deep puddles as it navigates the long, winding driveway. It drives right past the soaking wet, miserable figures of Brenda and Vanessa, who are undoubtedly staring at the glowing taillights of the sports car in complete despair. I turn away from the dark balcony, leave my empty margarita glass on the patio table, and walk downstairs to the kitchen. The kitchen is immaculate, featuring sleek white marble and polished chrome, a stark, quiet contrast to the shattered glass and ruined flowers sitting in the adjacent living room. I pull a heavy bottle of expensive red wine from the temperature-controlled cooler. I select 2 crystal glasses and set them on the island. A moment later, I hear the heavy oak front doors click open. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of stiletto heels approaches the kitchen. The woman steps into the bright overhead lighting. Up close, her glamour is even more striking. She is drenched from the short run from her car to the porch, but her skin, tight crimson dress, and flawless hair still command attention. However, her seductive, confident expression vanishes the second she sees me standing alone in the kitchen. She looks at the 2 wine glasses, looks at my calm demeanor, and frowns. "Who are you?" she asks, her purring tone completely gone, replaced by sharp, immediate suspicion. "Where is Jason?" "He told me this was his private coastal retreat. He gave me the security code for a romantic weekend." "It is a private coastal retreat," I reply casually, uncorking the wine and pouring the dark red liquid into the crystal glasses. "But it belongs exclusively to me. As for who I am Natalie, Jason's soon-to-be ex-wife." The color drains instantly from her perfectly contoured face. She takes a physical step backward, her manicured hand flying to her chest as if she has just been struck. Ex-wife. She stammers, genuine, unfiltered horror spreading across her features. Her confident posture crumbles completely. "He told me he was single. He swore to me on his life that he had never been married. I would never do this. I swear to you, I would never knowingly sleep with a married man." I study her carefully. Her hands are shaking. Her breathing is shallow. The panic radiating from her is absolutely real. Jason played her just as thoroughly and viciously as he played everyone else in his life. I slide one of the filled crystal glasses across the smooth marble island toward her. Drink it, I suggest, my voice devoid of any malice. You are going to need it, because finding out your boyfriend is a married liar is about to be the second worst piece of news you get tonight. She hesitantly approaches the island, her eyes never leaving mine. She sets down her bag on the floor and then places a heavy rigid leather briefcase onto one of the bar stools. It is a very specific type of briefcase. It is austere, highly secure, heavily padded, and completely at odds with her glamorous party-ready attire. I tap my fingernail against the marble counter, gesturing toward the bag. You are Chloe, I state rather than ask. You are the senior IRS compliance auditor assigned to the Northeastern financial sector. Specifically, you manage the sector covering Vance Financial and Jason's entire operational region. Chloe freezes. Her hand halts inches away from the wine glass. Her eyes widen in absolute paralyzing shock. How do you know my name? Chloe whispers, her voice tight with rising panic. How do you know my government position? Because I have spent the last 6 months tracking every single one of my husband's fraudulent transactions. I explain, leaning casually against the counter. When I found his hidden offshore accounts, his fabricated loss statements, and his entirely fake tax returns, I wondered how a sloppy, arrogant man like Jason managed to evade federal tax scrutiny for 4 years. He was moving hundreds of thousands of dollars, writing off fake corporate expenses, and hiding embezzled funds in dummy shell corporations. The math was incredibly messy. Anyone with a basic accounting degree would have caught him. But the regional IRS auditor never flagged his files. Chloe stares at me, her mouth slightly open, as the horrifying truth begins to click into place in her mind. I hired a private investigator. I continue relentless in my delivery. He followed Jason right to your apartment complex. Jason did not romance you because he was charmed by your personality, Chloe. He targeted you. He pursued you specifically because of your government clearance. He was sleeping with the auditor to ensure you never looked too closely at his paperwork. He used your bed as a human shield against a federal tax audit. Chloe closes her eyes, a look of profound physical sickness washing over her face. She grips the edge of the marble island so tightly her knuckles turn stark white. The romantic fantasy she drove through a thunderstorm to celebrate has just been violently ripped apart, exposing a cold, calculated, and highly illegal betrayal. He told me I was the only woman who truly understood his ambition. Chloe whispers, her voice cracking under the crushing weight of the humiliation. He took me to expensive dinners. He brought me flowers. He always asked me about my day at the agency. He listened to me complain about my heavy caseload and my random audit schedules. He was just gathering intelligence. He was monitoring my movements so he knew exactly when to shift his dirty money. He is a parasite, I say softly, taking a sip of my wine. He feeds on whatever resources are available. With my family, he fed on our real estate. With his mother, he fed on social status. With you, he fed on federal immunity. But his luck just ran out. An hour ago, the local police dragged him out of this exact house in handcuffs for federal wire fraud. Chloe's head snaps up. The overwhelming sadness in her eyes evaporates instantly, replaced by a blazing, terrifying inferno of sheer rage. The vulnerable, heartbroken mistress vanishes completely. In her place stands a humiliated, highly trained federal agent who realizes her entire career and professional integrity were just put at massive risk by a cheap, manipulative con artist. She grabs her heavy leather briefcase off the stool and hauls it directly onto my pristine kitchen island. She snaps the metal latches open with a vicious, echoing crack. She reaches inside, pulls out a thick government-issued encrypted laptop and flips the screen open. The blue light from the monitor illuminates her furious, determined face. Her fingers hover over the keyboard like weapons preparing to strike. He thought he could play me, Chloe hisses, her voice vibrating with lethal bureaucratic vengeance. I am going to trigger a full federal audit on his entire bloodline tonight. Chloe's fingers fly across the encrypted keyboard of her federal laptop. The absolute silence of the kitchen is punctuated only by the aggressive rhythmic clacking of the keys. She navigates through highly classified government databases, with lethal precision bypassing the protective flags Jason had manipulated her into setting. She hits the enter button with a definitive, resounding strike. The federal audit is officially locked into the system. Jason's entire financial existence, along with Brenda's heavily subsidized luxury lifestyle, is now under the uncompromising microscopic scrutiny of the Internal Revenue Service. Chloe slams her laptop shut, secures it inside her heavy leather briefcase, and fastens the metal latches with a sharp snap. She looks up at me, offering a single curt nod of mutual unspoken respect. She turns on her stiletto heels and marches straight out the front door. The aggressive roar of her Ferrari engine fades into the heavy coastal rain, leaving the estate in total absolute silence. I walk down the hallway and unlock the side service entrance. A highly trained team of 6 professional cleaners steps into the foyer. I hired them yesterday morning to prepare the house, but Brenda had aggressively turned them away at the security gate, screaming that their uniforms ruined the exclusive aesthetic of her high society party. Now they move into the wreckage with synchronized, ruthless efficiency. They descend upon the devastated living room like a tactical surgical team. Heavy-duty industrial trash bags quickly consume Brenda's tacky, ostentatious floral centerpieces and the cheap gold-painted plastic decorations she scattered across the mantel. Professional-grade wet vacuums suck up the shattered porcelain from her ruined Ming vase, the spilled champagne, and the muddy footprints tracked in by the fleeing VIP guests. The lingering, suffocating scent of Brenda's cloying designer perfume is methodically scrubbed away, replaced by the crisp, clean scent of lemon and sea salt. The gaudy rented chairs are folded and banished to the garage. Within an hour, they restore my parents' coastal estate to its original breathtaking elegance. The quiet sophistication of the space finally breathes again, completely sanitized of the Addams family infection. Oliver and I take our seats on the freshly cleaned white linen sofas in the serene living room. The violent storm outside has finally broken, reducing the torrential downpour to a gentle, steady rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Oliver unzips his leather portfolio and extracts a thick, impeccably organized stack of pristine legal documents. He lays them out sequentially on the polished mahogany coffee table. These are the finalized divorce filings accompanied by the federal asset seizure orders and the undeniable proof of wire fraud. We review the catastrophic damage line by line. Jason's fraudulent credit accounts are completely and permanently frozen. The digital trap I set provided the federal prosecutors with an airtight, inescapable case of identity theft and corporate embezzlement. Oliver assures me that Jason will not even be offered a plea deal. Given the federal parameters of the offshore accounts, he is looking at maximum time in a federal penitentiary. We move on to the restitution orders. Brenda's entire aristocratic lifestyle was built on a foundation of stolen money, and the bill has officially come due. Oliver hands me the injunctions that will systematically dismantle her remaining world by sunrise. My forensic accountants are already coordinating with federal authorities to execute the liens against her property. The bank will seize her primary residence before the end of the month. Her beloved country club membership, the sole metric she used to measure her worth and lord over her friends for a decade, will be instantly revoked for gross non-payment. Her luxury vehicles will be repossessed just like Vanessa's. Brenda and Jason thought they were untouchable because they possessed unearned arrogance. They believed they could bleed me dry, cast me aside, and continue living like royalty on my dime. I pick up a sleek black pen and begin signing my name on the dotted lines, my signature sharp and definitive. I reflect on the agonizing, intensely silent years I spent preparing for this exact night. When I first discovered Jason was siphoning my accounts, I did not scream. I did not throw plates against the wall or stage a dramatic weeping confrontation in the middle of the kitchen. Instead, I poured myself a cup of black coffee, opened my laptop, and started reading. I spent 80-hour work weeks building my digital infrastructure company, and I spent my midnight hours mastering federal tax codes, corporate liability laws, and airtight asset protection loopholes. I sat through countless agonizing family dinners, listening to Brenda and Vanessa mock my practical clothes and call me a glorified math tutor. I smiled politely and passed the wine while quietly mapping every single vulnerability in their financial armor. They operated under the foolish delusion that power was loud. They thought power meant screaming at service workers, flaunting diamond necklaces, and dominating the conversation at charity galas. I learned the truth. True power is absolutely silent. True power is having the flawless, undeniable paperwork to back up your silence. I sign the final page of the divorce decree. Oliver gathers the documents, taps them against the table to align the edges perfectly, and slips them back into his portfolio. The heavy, dark weight of the last 10 years officially lifts from my shoulders, leaving me feeling remarkably light. I stand up and walk over to the expansive glass doors leading out to the balcony. The rain has stopped entirely. The sky above the Atlantic Ocean begins to lighten, shifting rapidly from deep midnight blue to soft, bruised shades of pink and vibrant orange. The first brilliant rays of the morning sun break over the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow across the manicured lawns and the calm coastal waters. The storm is over. The slate is entirely clean. The profound silence of the pristine house is broken by the sharp, cheerful ringing of my cell phone resting on the kitchen island. I walk over and check the glowing caller ID. It is the concierge desk at the Ritz-Carlton. I tap the screen and answer, bringing the phone to my ear. The concierge's voice is bright and exceptionally professional. "Good morning, Miss Wilson," he says. "Your parents are awake and have just finished their complimentary sunrise spa treatment. They are extremely excited and requesting a private car to bring them over to the estate. They say they are finally ready to see their actual anniversary gift." I instruct the concierge to arrange the private car immediately and hang up the phone. I walk into the kitchen and start brewing a fresh pot of coffee. The rich, dark aroma fills the pristine space, mingling perfectly with the crisp, salty ocean breeze, drifting in through the open balcony doors. I stand by the marble island, listening to the rhythmic, soothing sound of the coffee dripping into the glass carafe. The house is completely silent, completely mine, and entirely cleansed of the toxic parasites who infected it just hours ago. 20 minutes later, the smooth hum of a luxury engine echoes up the driveway. I walk to the foyer and pull open the heavy oak double doors. A sleek black town car is idling in the circular driveway. The uniformed chauffeur steps out, walks around the back, and opens the passenger door. My father Thomas steps out first, followed closely by my mother Diane. They both look exhausted, hesitant, and visibly anxious. They cast nervous glances toward the garage, clearly expecting to see Jason's sports car or Brenda's obnoxious luxury sedan. They brace themselves, squaring their shoulders, as if preparing to walk onto a battlefield. They are expecting the loud, condescending voices of the Addams family. They are expecting Brenda to insult their clothes and Jason to make arrogant, dismissive remarks. Instead, they step over the threshold and stop dead in their tracks. My mother inhales deeply. She looks around the spotless, sunlit foyer, her eyes traveling into the immaculate living room. The tacky gold decorations are gone. The hideous floral arrangements have vanished. There is no shattered glass, no spilled champagne, and absolutely no trace of Brenda's aggressive, suffocating presence. The house simply breathes. It is elegant, peaceful, and perfectly restored. "Where are they?" My father asks, his voice cautious and tight with confusion. "Where is Jason? Where is Brenda?" "They are gone," I state, walking forward and taking my mother's hands in mine. "They are gone for good, and they are never coming back." My parents exchange a bewildered look. I guide them gently into the living room and sit them down on the pristine white linen sofa. I walk over to the mahogany coffee table where Oliver left a single thick manila envelope resting perfectly in the center. I pick it up and hand it directly to my father. "I told you that you were going to get your actual anniversary gift today," I tell them, my voice steady and warm. "Open it." My father's hands tremble slightly as he breaks the seal. He pulls out a stack of heavy watermarked legal parchment. He adjusts his reading glasses, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon, the official state seals, and the certified signatures. His breath hitches. He reads the top page again, shaking his head as if his eyes are deceiving him. "Natalie," he whispers, looking up at me with absolute shock. "This is an irrevocable trust deed for this entire estate. It says the property is fully paid off and permanently deeded to Thomas and Diane. It is yours, I confirm, kneeling in front of them, so I am at their eye level. I bought this house for you. I put it in a bulletproof, legally impenetrable trust. It is completely insulated from any debts, any creditors, and any greedy in-laws. Jason cannot touch it. Brenda cannot claim a single square inch of it. It belongs to you free and clear for the rest of your lives. My father drops the paperwork onto his lap. The stoic, hard-working man who spent his entire life breaking his back to provide for his family suddenly crumbles. He buries his face in his hands, letting out a thick, ragged sob of pure, unadulterated joy. He has spent the last 5 years feeling inadequate, feeling like he could never match the aggressive inherited wealth of my husband's family. Now he realizes he does not have to. My mother lets out a sharp gasp, tears flooding her eyes. She reaches out and grabs me, pulling me into a fierce, desperate embrace. She holds me so tightly I can barely breathe. For years, she watched Brenda belittle me. She watched Jason treat me like a convenient accessory. She thought I was trapped, financially dependent, and quietly suffering. I am so sorry, she cries against my shoulder, her voice breaking. We thought you were stuck. We thought you were just taking their abuse because you had no other choice. We had no idea how strong you actually are. You never have to apologize to me, I whisper, hugging her back just as tightly. I let them believe I was weak because it made them careless. I let them mock me while I built an empire right under their noses. I am not a victim, Mom. I am the architect of my own life. As we pull apart, a sharp metallic buzz echoes from the kitchen island. I stand up and walk over to my phone. The screen is illuminated with 2 high-priority encrypted text messages. The first is from Oliver. It reads smoothly and professionally. The emergency bail hearing just concluded. The federal judge reviewed the wire fraud evidence and the offshore transaction logs. Bail is completely denied due to extreme flight risk. Jason is officially remanded to federal custody. He is not getting out. The second message is from the lead forensic accountant on my team. The federal lien against Brenda's primary residence has been successfully executed and recorded with the county clerk. Her bank accounts are frozen. The asset seizure is fully underway. A slow, deeply satisfying smile spreads across my face. The trap did not just snap shut. It pulverized them entirely. Jason is sitting in a concrete federal cell wearing a bright orange jumpsuit, completely stripped of his tailored suits and his arrogant smirk. Brenda is currently standing in the pouring rain, dragging a broken garbage bag down a suburban street, knowing she is walking back to a house she no longer owns. I lock my phone and slide it into my pocket. I look back at my parents, who are still wiping away tears of relief and looking around their beautiful new home. Come on, I say, gesturing toward the open French doors. Let us go look at the ocean. We walk out onto the expansive covered balcony together. The morning sun is now fully above the horizon, painting the crashing waves of the Atlantic in brilliant strokes of gold and amber. The coastal air is crisp and clean, washing away the last lingering remnants of the suffocating toxic atmosphere the Addams family brought into my life. My parents stand at the glass railing, their arms wrapped around each other, watching the tide roll in with expressions of absolute peace. I stand a few feet away, looking down at my left hand. The heavy, ostentatious diamond engagement ring catches the morning sunlight. Jason bought this ring using money he siphoned from a fraudulent credit line. It was never a symbol of love. It was a prop. It was a tool he used to maintain the illusion of his success while he drained my resources behind my back. I reach over and grip the diamond. With one smooth, deliberate motion, I pull the ring off my finger. I do not hesitate. I walk over to the heavy metal trash receptacle sitting in the corner of the patio. I hold the ring over the dark opening and simply let go. It hits the bottom of the metal bin with a hollow, meaningless clink. I turn my back on the trash bin and walk over to stand beside my parents at the railing. I rest my hands on the cool glass, breathing in the salt air. The last decade of my life was a grueling, agonizing lesson in human nature. I learned that blood does not automatically grant you loyalty, and a marriage certificate does not automatically grant you safety. Family is not defined by shared DNA, and it is certainly not defined by standing at an altar. Family is defined by mutual, unwavering respect. It is defined by the people who protect you in the dark, who celebrate your victories without jealousy, and who build you up instead of tearing you down to inflate their own fragile egos. I spent years allowing parasites to sit at my table, eating the food I bought, drinking the wine I paid for, and insulting me while they did it. I will never make that mistake again. I know my worth, I know my power, and I know exactly who I am. If someone cannot offer you